lots of decisions I think have been made throughout the history of Mozilla that are kind of interesting to this discussion, and the ones I won't go into are the open source piece of it. And there's lots in there, but I think everybody knows that, and there's distributed decision making and transparency and openness and all that stuff. So there's lots to be learned from that. The thing I didn't, and that it was that stuff that drew me to Mozilla 3 years ago, because it really is an organization that has a lot to teach the world and also a lot to learn from others in terms of how that openness and open source piece works. The thing I didn't know before going to Mozilla that was really, I guess, two intercoupled things. The thing I didn't know is how much the idea of building a set of values into a set of products that people would like was at the center of the strategy. And it was both explicit and kind of bumbling at the same time. So I think that's part of, I think, what's most interesting. And so, the values piece is, here's this group of Netscape refugees. There's actually a great story where it's a guy who'd been laid off from Netscape. He'd been kind of like a product engineer in Paris, and he's in this kind of like therapy session after you're laid off with all these other people who've been laid off. And everybody's going around like in AA saying, what are you going to do? I'm going to learn how to be a chef, or I'm going to go back to art school. And he goes, well, I'm going to set up a nonprofit that's going to beat Microsoft. And everybody kind of laughs at him. But this was like the genesis of this organization, right? Is they had this open source code. They have $2 million from AOL. They've got a little bit of money from Mitch Kapoor. There's 10 staff and a community of people who are, have this holy mission to protect web standards. If you go back to the kind of California incorporation papers in 2003, it says Mozilla exists to guard the open nature of the internet. So, right from there is this idea that it's coming from a set of values, a bunch of very idealistic people. And I think, what's interesting to dig into deeper later on that is that's partly a real set of, a real statement of values, and it's partly about preserving the value in the network. So, Mozilla, the project, well before AOL divests itself, has got this big volunteer community. And there is if we do it as a nonprofit, if we proclaim this value, we're going to keep that asset of that community. Those people are going to keep contributing. They're going to believe in us. So that's the one part of the decision. But that part of the decision on its own, I think certainly Mozilla would have failed, and you would all still be using IE6. Because the thing that they started out with and hung on to in that at least the first year was this very crappy Mozilla suite that was the kind of outcome of the the kind of outgrowth of the Netscape suite, right? It was this big bloated piece of software. It wasn't any better than IE6. They'd been working at it for 5 years. It wasn't going anywhere in the market, and there was a kind of an internal fight over, do we do the leaner, meaner thing, which was called Phoenix and then called Firebird and then called Firefox, or do we just kind of keep trying to incrementally improve this, this big Mozilla suite? And the idea really was, if you want open source and web standards to really have an impact in the market and shift the market, you've got to make something that people want. So you've got to make something leaner, something faster, something that has a bunch of product features that people want, like blocking pop-ups and various things like this. And so there became a very specific strategy about, let's make the most attractive product in the market as a way to drive these values into the market. So it was about bringing web standards back through that. And that was a 6-month kind of fight to get to that point. And I think then in terms of what I think of as probably Mozilla's biggest peer production victory, I think Mozilla's biggest victory overall was pushing web standards back into the mainstream amongst web developers. But the biggest peer production web victory that comes from those two things really is the marketing of Firefox. This is an organization that has got a quarter, now 22% of global market share, 500 million users for its product, zero marketing budget. And I think partly that's internet economics. Like lots of the companies here haven't got huge marketing budgets, but it was that combination of a thing that if I was a kind of amongst the faithful, right, the people on this side of Jamie's collection over here kind of care about the net, I'm excited about this, right? This isn't Microsoft, this is open source, I know what open source means. But if I'm just somebody who doesn't care, like my brother or my uncle or whatever, this is a good product, it actually works better. So when I go and install that on your computer, I'm gonna keep using it. At the same time, if you went and installed, Red Hat 2 on their computer whenever they first came with the GUI, or even Ubuntu today, it's not gonna stick. So that connection of the values and the kind of quality of the product with this evangelism army, I think was a really important thing in terms of what to look at. I think in any of the stuff we're talking about, having that magnetic piece at the center that people want to use is really central.